Hello and welcome on the barricades. This is your favorite Eastern European political show where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy Western media narratives. My name is Bojan Stanislavski, and I'll be hosting the show today, as usual, my Romanian colleague Maria Chernat. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And today we have a very special guest for you, Paul J. For all those who don't know, he is a well-known Canadian-American journalist, filmmaker, the founder and host of theAnalysis-news, a podcaster and a YouTuber. He was the Real News Network's founder and senior editor previously. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you on, Paul. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Right. So you're, as I said, Canadian-American journalist, and yet you're here on our Eastern European show, and that's because although territorially it might be halfway around the world, we are a region which is extremely dependent on the United States. Not necessarily maybe in terms of economic relations or trade, but in terms of political decision making. Because I can maybe think of two countries, throughout the region, from the Baltics to Greece, where major political decisions aren't consulted prior to their implementation with the American, embassies in the respective countries. So whatever happens in America, okay, is immediately translated into something here. And it could be anything. I mean, it depends on the country, it depends on the moment, it depends on a variety of factors, really. But the main thing that determines what's going to happen in our countries and in other countries around the world, which also have this kind of dependency, or worse, because they were bombed or whatever kind of attacked by the United States and so on and so forth, or are under attack, like Venezuela or Cuba, which has been under which is a constant, basically, object of some kind of attack and repression from the side of the United States since it has been like that for the last 60 years or so. So the determining factor here is the foreign policy, and I wonder whether we could start with, what is your understanding of the American foreign policy today? Is there any change today in comparison with what it has been like under Trump, under Obama? And of course, the hidden question behind it is, for us, basically, for me and Maria and other maybe political analysts here in the region, to try and make the educated guesses as to what it could mean for us, like what's going to happen tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, in 1 week time, in 1 month time, here in Bulgaria, in Poland, in other countries, Romania or the Baltic states, and so on and so forth. So please, it's a very general question, I realize, but try to make a general assessment. What is the American foreign policy today?
Well, in a word, and it's been this policy since at least 1940, the end of World War II. The underlying principle of U.S. foreign policy is to be the global hegemon. And to be the global hegemon, it means you have to be the dominant power in every region of the globe, or you ain't the global hegemon. So every region they want to be, try to be. But of course, since World War II, there's been a change in the nature of global capitalism. First of all, the fall of the Soviet Union, and now Russia, although it's a mid-level capitalist economy, it has a very serious military, it has nuclear weapons, and it has like it or don't like it, they have pretty smart people running the show, at least smart compared, I think, to the Americans. The Chinese are now obviously emerging as something new that the United States has never had to deal with. Which is an economic power. I think, I would call it state capitalist. They call themselves uniquely Chinese socialists, but whatever you want to call it, it's a competitor that the United States has never faced. Even in the days of the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union was, perhaps at its strongest and so on, it was never an economic competitor outside the borders of the Soviet Union, except you could say like selling arms to India, or there's a little bit going on, but it was never a serious economic competitor for global leadership. And it wasn't very long into the 80s and 90s when the Americans realized that the Soviet Union was, so bureaucratic and was imploding and would probably shoot itself out of existence, which is what eventually happened. So the idea, the plan, the need, the interest they see of being the global hegemon is deeply baked into the foreign policy culture. Whether they see themselves as the champions of global democracy, and I think lots of them believe it. Most people believe what they think is in their interest to believe, so they believe it, even though they can somehow get their heads around supporting, since World War II, hundreds of dictatorships. But see, the Americans believe they do bad things for good reasons, where everyone else does bad things for bad reasons. So if Eastern Europe, the region of Eastern Europe, Americans have to be dominant, because if they're not, they don't want Russia becoming dominant. And they see that as the only alternative. And they see Russia, and this is the thing where I think it's very important. Don't underestimate the lack of rationality in U.S. foreign policy, or frankly, any government's foreign policy. We sit here and think about, well, look at their interests. Shouldn't they be doing this? That would be so much more rational.
That's right. Can I interrupt you right here? Because this is something that I think is very important for our viewers to consume, because there is an underlying ideological element here. And, regardless of whether it reflects their interest or it reflects only their thoughts about their interest or their perception, oftentimes false, of their interest and so on and so forth. But there is this thing which is, okay, maybe it's not metaphysical, but it's deeply ideological, that they perceive themselves somehow as the good people that are against the evil in the world. And whatever they do, even if it's the same that the evil, whatever, people, states, entities do, when they do it, it's fine. And this is something which, and I'm glad you brought it up, is deeply embedded in the mindset of the American foreign policy makers, so they can do whatever they like. And I think, and perhaps you're going to go to that or later on, that they are having now a very serious, or they seem that's what it looks like from Eastern Europe, Eastern European perspective. They seem to go through a very difficult psychological moment right now, because for the first time in I don't know how many years, decades, someone is telling them, guys, just shut up and go away and let us rule in where we are elected to rule. It's Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba, and stuff like that. And particularly after this train wreck in Anchorage some months ago, okay, when Blinken met with the Chinese delegation, it's very obvious. They seem to be, we have a saying in Bulgarian that someone walks around as if they were slapped with a wet piece of fabric on their face. Okay, and the American foreign policy makers, they kind of look like this. When you look at Sullivan or Blinken, they really make an impression of very, very confused people. Okay, sorry for this interruption, but I just wanted to make sure that this point is clear to our viewers. Go ahead.
You wanted me to go ahead, or you want to ask Maria?
No, I would just like to say that luckily, even in Romania, which is a very obedient country that always has this lick-booting squad of intellectuals ready to say things on behalf of the American embassy. We here in Romania have intellectuals that are more pro-Americans than the Biden administration itself. I think they are more pro-Americans than the head of the CIA, if that's possible. But it is good to see that finally, even in Romania, with such an obedient intellectual elite, we see some dissenting voices. So maybe there is hope, and maybe we can see some cracks through the walls, like Boyan said, in terms of America being the hegemon here in Eastern Europe. What do you think?
Well, I think the question should be asked, why, after the fall of the Soviet Union, why didn't Russia get integrated more thoroughly, more completely into global capitalism, especially in terms of the political structures. Putin at one point wanted to join NATO. Why didn't Russia become just another country like the European countries? And I can't give a full answer. I can tell you, some of my initial thoughts. I'm sure there's people that can take a crack at that better than I do. But I think it's two or three things. One is Russia, even though it's not, is a mid-level sized economy, it's still a pretty big economy. It has a lot of fossil fuel. It has a lot of leverage in terms of Europe because of the oil supplies. I know that during the time of the Libyan war, there was a very interesting WikiLeaks where there was a cable from the ambassador, I believe it was in Rome, back to Hillary Clinton. And in it, they talked about how the Russian Gazprom was using the Italian oil company to make a deal with Gaddafi in Libya that it would look like the Italians were getting the lion's share of Libyan oil, and it was really the Russians through Gazprom. And the cable said, we can't allow this to happen. Now, this is just early in the buildup to the intervention or invasion of Libya. And the cable says, we can't allow Russia to further tighten the energy noose around the neck of Europe. So Russia, traditionally hadn't been part of the American umbrella. It had levers of power that were outside the control of the United States. Putin, in organizing the Russian state out of the chaos of the 90s, which the Americans, of course, helped create, he had created a state that was was very nationalist, really defended its sovereignty, for better or worse in terms of the Russian people, but still, it was not a state that would be pliant with the United States. And I don't think all of Western Europe are puppets or anything, but Germany and France, and they have their differences, and in the lead up to the Iraq War, France was very opposed to the Iraq War. But
that's true. But on the other hand, let me just say that it was like twice or three times when it was revealed that the Americans were wiretapping Angela Merkel's mobile phone, private and business or whatever.
That's
yeah,
my
but
point.
I just want to say that no one has said anything about it. Like everybody just said, it's an unfortunate situation, right?
Yeah, well, the Germans and French are like the Canadians. They resent the American power. On the other hand, they can't afford to get into a fight that might cause trade relations. And in Canada particularly, like Canadians sent soldiers to Afghanistan just to make sure they could keep sending goods to the United States because Canada didn't send troops to Iraq. Anyway, my point is that Russia didn't fit into the model of the kind of alliance that the United States has with Western Europe, where Western Europe willingly plays second fiddle most of the time. On the other hand, are a serious economic power in their own right. So it was also very convenient for the Americans. They need this existential enemy. You can't negate how important that is to the industrial military complex. And not to have an extension, you can't justify billions and billions of dollars, that's really trillions, but I'm talking specifically about the Ford class I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the name, aircraft carriers at $14 billion apiece, and they're doing more than a dozen of them. You don't need that to fight guerrillas or Islamists in the Middle East. So there's a lot of reasons for not including Russia in, but one of the main things that I think really pissed off the West, and to this day is one of the reasons they continue the pressure on Russia, is Putin never allowed American finance freewheeling in Russia. They don't. It's the same thing. The Chinese are not allowing them freewheeling, and the American finance sector. They really, they'd love to see regime change in Russia to a more open capitalist model, meaning finance gets to do more or less whatever it pleases. So there's a lot of reasons. So Eastern Europe obviously is in the middle of all this. And as long as there's this kind of contention with Russia, the Americans will want to maintain a quite tight grip on Eastern Europe. And someday you may have a change in Russia. It's not out of the question. You might find. So
well, yeah,
that could
sure.
change.
I mean, that of course could happen, and Putin's been in power for like 20 years now, or 20 or 17 or something like that. So I just, I'm reading the Russian press, I'm watching Russian media, and I can see, that Putin and in general his administration, particularly Lavrov, who's his foreign minister, they are very tired already, and they would have loved, to go, but they feel they just can't because there's people,
Well,
right around the corner just
sorry
waiting
to
for that to
interrupt, but
happen.
I think they build their own trap. I don't think this is the scope of the show, but I think they build their own trap. They build some sort of political power where everything depends on them, unfortunately. But my question to Paul is there any other way? Because I remember when discussing first about this show, and I told you that unfortunately, except for some states in Latin America that managed to have socialist governments that oppose USA, and apart from probably Venezuela, and apart from some countries in Western Europe, you don't see a political regime that is democratic and at the same time manages to oppose the United States and its hegemony. So you either have some sort of local authoritarian leader with authoritarian tendencies like Putin, or you have the US boot on the necks of your politicians. For the most part of the world, I don't think there's a way out. What do you think about that?
Well, there's no way out as long as the elites of all these countries profit from global capitalism. And so, I mean, Germany and France are not puppet states of the United States by any means, but they know their bread is buttered by a system managed by the United States. And they depend on the power of the American Fed and the American military to manage this global system. And their elites, the alternative is obvious. People have to either by voting or some other way get rid of these elites. They have to, who has power has to change. But we're in a very particular moment now. This isn't the same this year even, this decade. It's not the same as the previous decades, and for two or three reasons. One, first and foremost, climate. It's starting to sink through the heads of some of these people. And of course now, the Germans and others are getting it more than ever. But even in the US, it's starting to get through their heads that this climate crisis is for real. It may be too late to do anything about it in the way how quickly things can change. But people can start seeing cracks in the whole system. They can start to see the social order really, I don't know, collapsing may be an exaggeration, but a level of global disorganization. Like, add two things together. In Asia, in the poorest parts of Asia, Africa, and much of Latin America, you have a pandemic. You're going to have a climate that's unlivable. Put this together, the amount of migration from south to north over the next decade, it's unimaginable how many millions and millions of people, for their own survival, are going to have to try to make it either to Europe or to the United States across land borders. Get your head around the scale of what's coming, and it's coming soon. On the geopolitical level, the United States as a global hegemon has no idea how to remain the hegemon of Asia. They are no longer the hegemon of Asia. They're afraid of getting pushed out of Asia. And it's a very dangerous situation. If you read some of the American foreign policy stuff, they talk about what would happen if China, over the next decade or so, is able to bring Japan on board and start to actually freeze the United States out of Asian markets. I don't know how real a threat that is, but it's being talked about. Here's the underlying problem. The underlying problem is capitalism as a system, although it's been far more resilient than any lefty socialist imagined in the from Marx on, it's no longer going to be so resilient. It can't deal with climate. The U.S. and China are heading for confrontation here. This is where I get back to rationality or irrationality. Like, why? Why is the United States pushing China? It makes no sense. Like, if you want to remain the reserve currency, you don't push China into a position of giving up on the U.S. dollar, but they're doing it. Both in terms of the objective economic interest and the psychological, cultural influences, they're like on this track towards. I don't like to use war with China because if they ever get there, we're all done. That's the other thing that never even
with
gets
Russia, for that matter. Yeah.
Yeah, but with Russia, I think it's more posturing. I mean, Russia's not a real competitor to the United States. It's huffs and puffs, and they did what, frankly, even what Russia did in Syria did the Americans a favor in the long run. So it's good for the Russian domestic audience and the American domestic audience to yell at each other. Both have military-industrial complexes. Both have nationalism they like to fuel the fire of. But it's mostly bullshit because there isn't enough at stake between the two of them.
Well,
the real issue is China.
I want to push back a little bit against that because, what happened in Ukraine is something that perhaps people in America or Canada are not able to kind of fully perceive the weight of it. But it's something that has, first of all, it's a disaster. Okay, like look at Ukraine today. It's a partitioned country, very miserable, almost no economy, or if there is any, it's virtually run by a consulate of oligarchs right there. Okay, who are independent pretty much of every. They are ruling independently just because they are filthy rich, okay, and they can do whatever they want in those countries, in this country. And then, you have 30%, or I don't know how, what is the exact percentage, but it's a huge percentage of people that emigrated from that country. You see German trucks of private companies digging, okay, the ground in Ukraine, the soil, and which is being sold to German corporations, and it's being driven out of the country somewhere, to Germany, in order to make their soil better for farming or growing crops or whatever. You see all those things. And so, look, this is Victoria Nuland. This is Jeffrey Pyatt. This is Barack Obama. This is something extreme. This was something that was, a breaking point for the Russians.
You're not speaking to my point. No, the Americans are not going to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. Do you think they will?
No, I don't think they will, but I think it was close a couple of times. And particularly now... I don't know.
I don't believe the United States is not going to go to war over Eastern Europe with Russia, and vice versa. Russia, it's in neither interest.
Now not. Like during the times of the Warsaw Pact, Russia would have gone to war over, with other countries over whatever their allies. But now, not anymore. I would also want to say that there's a major difference which I can see between America and Russia, which is Russia just wants to be left alone. That's their message, and this is what they've been trying to convey for the last, I don't know how many, 15 or 20 years since Putin basically came to power after the first disillusionment.
What does that mean? What does that mean, left alone?
Left alone.
What does that mean? That's not, what does that mean?
Whereas America wants to meddle everywhere. So, I don't think you can just easily say that those are two countries which are absolutely equal and have no... And it's just for the sake of their domestic policy, they're just flexing their muscles. I see a major difference between Russia, which does not want and has no intentions to become a global hegemon, and had on multiple occasions to
can I get a listen to me, okay? Can I say something?
Sure, go ahead.
Every capitalist country would like to be the global hegemon. Only some can. If Canada was offered the opportunity to be the global hegemon, they would jump at it in 5 seconds. Norway, Sweden, maybe Finland. There's not a single capitalist country that wouldn't like to be the global hegemon.
But would like and to actually
let me finish a paragraph, please.
Is a different story.
You got to let me finish my points.
Okay.
Because you can't. Okay. Of course, Russia meddles in its neighboring countries, and so should it. Why shouldn't a capitalist country be concerned with what happens on its borders? The United States does the same thing with Mexico, Canada, and I'm talking never mind global reach. They're very directly involved. It's certainly in Latin America. They even have something called the Monroe Doctrine, which justified it all. There's no such thing as just leave us alone. Russia wants to compete with global arms in the global arms industry. Russia certainly wants to sell fossil fuel into Western Europe and other parts of the world. Russia's doesn't want to be a hermit going into a cave. At the moment, Russia doesn't have the power to do much, but that doesn't mean the nationalist forces in Russia wouldn't like to, and who knows what might happen in the future. As I say, there's very virulent nationalist forces, certainly in the U.S. and in Russia and in China, all of them. This is why it's dangerous. I don't think China, let me back up a step. There's a difference between meddling and military intervention. Like, I don't think China has any plans, or Russia, other than maybe something directly on its border that they consider a threat. Like, it could be Ukraine to Russia, it could be Taiwan to China. But past that, they have no plans for military bases all around the world. They don't have aircraft carriers everywhere.
That's right. You said it yourself.
Everywhere. Yeah. So there's no other power in the world that has the kind of aggressive posture of the United States. But it doesn't mean at a regional level they don't do what they can to enhance their own elites, and they do.
Yeah, okay, but can I interrupt now? Like, there is a difference between following your interests. Like, Russia has interest in Ukraine, Russia has interest in Belarus, Russia has interest in Mongolia, in whatever, collaborating with China, collaborating with India, and they're pursuing those interests. And that's something which speaks to some kind of rationality and logic. And I kind of understand that I might not like that for some reason, because, I don't know, they might, for example, exploit some weakness of whatever countries they're dealing with, and I would, philosophically, morally, politically, ethically, I wouldn't like that. But it's something else with United States, who come to Eastern Europe, colonize it basically, and then blow up a country like Ukraine, turn it into a piece of territory with no future, I basically see a qualitative difference, okay, between the behavior and foreign policy of Russia and United States.
Yeah, so, but that wasn't my point.
Look, I don't want to argue about that for the next 10 minutes.
But let me finish my point.
All right.
Okay.
Because that wasn't making that point, that there's an equivalency between them. Of course there isn't. The United States has committed crimes outside its borders no one can compete with. No, my point was that I don't see why there's a real threat of war other than accidentally or between Russia and the United States. The issue of China and the United States is a qualitatively different issue, because China is a real global competitor. Already in Latin America, most of the Latin American countries, including Brazil, the largest economy of Latin America, their number one trading partner now is China, not the United States. It's true in many parts of the world. And the problem for the United States is they don't know what to do about it. And there really isn't much they could do about it. Now, if they were rational, and if they would just figure out a way to work with China, and this is where they're caught, because they so want into the Chinese market. So they want to be aggressive with China all over the globe, trying to push back on the inroads China's made commercially in so many places. And they still want access to the Chinese market. I mean, Chinese are not going to do that. So if you're asking what's new about U.S. foreign policy, what's new is they don't know what to do about China, because other than instigating a military confrontation, which they can't because it leads to nuclear war, all they can do is do what they're doing, is keep trying to push back and I mean, I don't have an answer for what they do, and that's not my problem, because I don't run the United States. But that's what's new. Read the foreign policy literature. It's all about what the hell to do with China. All they can do is dream, and I don't know if they're right or wrong, that China itself is going to weaken for internal reasons. And if they're right, well, maybe. But right now, we're faced with the problem is that the United States doesn't want to give up global hegemony. We're facing a climate crisis that if China and the United States and the other major countries don't cooperate on, within just a few decades, human society as we know it is going to start to disintegrate. So it's a very dangerous point. So what does it really mean for peoples of Eastern Europe or Canada or anywhere else for that matter? It's really the same question. We can't let these elites continue to drive us off a cliff. And we can't, being subservient to U.S. embassies in Eastern Europe, and I have to say even in Canada, one of our governments was directly overthrown by the United States out of the U.S. embassy. So most countries are in a similar situation. But our elites, when a push comes to shove, they won't defy the United States on the important issues because their own domestic capitalist systems depend on it. So that's what has to change. We have to find ways to elect, or I mean, more or less it's going to be elections in most of these countries. I don't think you can have like Cuban revolutions anymore.
All right.
Let me finish my point. If we
Please,
don't elect really progressive socialist and democratic forces that can start to change the nature of each economy, then you're not going to see a break from the United States. I don't see. Not in a time frame that matters.
All right, so I'm going to jump in now. We're going to go to a short break, and we're going to be back in 30 seconds.